Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to get started in just a few moments. We're just waiting for a few more people to join. Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar this morning. We are Fourth Economy. We are an economic and community development consulting firm that's based in Pittsburgh, PA. We're national and we have staff presence throughout the country. And we're very pleased to be presenting this webinar about the arts and economic recovery in your community, specifically focused on some case studies and local practices from the state of Pennsylvania, but also more broadly, we think applicable in communities throughout the country. So I'm going to introduce some of our speakers and panelists that you'll be hearing from throughout the course of the webinar this morning. You can see our speakers. We have Joy Ruff, who is the Executive Director of the Local Government Academy. We have Karl Blischke, who's the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. We have Jamie Dunlap, who's the Chief of Creative Catalysts and Lifelong Learning at the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. And my name is Nicole Muise-Kielkucki, and I'm the Director of Economic Innovation here at Fourth Economy Consulting. After a quick presentation, we'll turn it over to our guest panelists, who are local practitioners throughout the state of Pennsylvania, to talk a little bit more about their work and their experience on the ground in their communities. Those panelists are Patrick Fisher, who's the Executive Director of Erie Arts and Culture, also Kate Kennedy, who's the Executive Director of the Kane Area Development Center, and Pamela Bridgeforth, who is the Director of Programs at the Philadelphia Association of CDCs. So with that, I will turn over to Jamie and Karl from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, who will tell us a little bit more about how this conversation came to be. Jamie and Karl.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Karl from PA Council on the Arts. Thank you for spending some time with us today. I do want to say a quick thank you to the Fourth Economy and the Local Government Academy for hosting this webinar. Just briefly, I'll tell you a little bit about the Council on the Arts. We are a state agency in the Office of the Governor. And among other things, we work to support the role of the creative sector in enhancing communities. And fortunately, in PA, we really have a robust creative sector. In fact, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis tracks the value of arts and cultural production in the state, and we'll say pre-pandemic, that was over $27 billion added annually to our economy in Pennsylvania. So as we seek to recover and build resilience for Pennsylvania, we know that communities want to be attractive and vibrant places, and we know that communities want to be competitive for retaining and attracting residents, a talented workforce, and investment. At the PCA, we like to say that building strong communities takes creativity, and creative sector strategies, some of which we'll hear about today, can help communities not only enhance their economies, but also the social and physical characteristics of their communities. We know that the creative sector was greatly impacted by the pandemic along with other key industries. So we sought to get information about that impact and to use that to have a discussion across Pennsylvania. So to talk a little bit more about that, I'll turn it over to Jamie.
Great, thanks, Karl. Yeah, so with that, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, we contracted with the local government academy and Fourth Economy to conduct a study on how the state's creative sector has adapted and continues to adapt and adjust throughout the pandemic. And also to take a look at ways to help stabilize the sector and support its social and economic benefits. So during today's session, you're going to hear about the report, as well as some recommendations on ways that we can connect communities and the creative sector, especially for some of the folks on the call today, our economic development friends, developers, communities, arts organizations. We'd love to be able to connect all of you to opportunities through the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, so that you all can take a look at how the creative sector can really be an asset in recovery and reimagining efforts. You know, there are several opportunities through the PCA, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, that could be of value and interest to some of you on the call today. Things such as our small business loan fund for creative small businesses that we've done in partnership with Bridgeway Capital and Community First, or funding for creative entrepreneurs and micro small businesses, and resources and support for those small businesses, or lifelong learning opportunities for Pennsylvania citizens through the arts. So we're hoping that as an outcome from today's presentation, that we can offer up some of those opportunities and resources through the PCA. We can connect you to our partners and to some of those opportunities and grants through our agency. So what I am going to do is I'm going to put my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out. If you have some ideas or some questions following today's session, be happy to have a call or an email exchange to discuss it in greater detail. So with that, I am going to pass it to Joy with the Local Government Academy. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everyone. My name is Joy Ruff. I'm Executive Director of Local Government Academy. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit with the mission to promote excellence in local government. And we do that through the delivery of educational programs and training on best practices to have a well-governed, vibrant, and strong community. And we believe that the arts is an essential part of the economic structure of a successful community, but it does so much more. It brings people together, it preserves our heritage, and it builds bridges that bring people together. So I'm very excited to be part of this effort, and I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole to take us away.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all of those remarks. I'm going to dive into the report that we produced for the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts in partnership with the Local Government Academy it was published in June of 2021. So we really sought to look at the impacts that COVID-19 had on the creative sector in Pennsylvania, but also very broadly sort of what the importance of the sector in general is, as well as, you know, what can be done from a short-term economic recovery standpoint and long-term resilience standpoint in our communities. And so one of the first things that we sought to do through this report was to define the creative sector, because we know that the creative sector is very multifaceted. When people hear the words creative creative sector or arts and culture, they can have a lot of different ideas of what that means in their head. And so we came up with this definition of the creative sector and really determined that the creative sector in Pennsylvania is quite diverse. It includes nonprofit organizations like ballet companies, museums, and art schools. It also includes for-profit ventures like film companies, galleries, design firms, and publishers, as well as the independent artists and producers that work within those industries, maybe as sole proprietors or maybe as professionals and gig workers throughout the creative economy. So we wanted to start there to ensure that we were on the same page in terms of what we're talking about when we're talking about the creative sector and how diverse it is and how it affects our economy and our communities. This definition also was very useful in terms of coming up with categories when we did our data analysis. So one of the things that we took a look at was a lot of different industry and labor data from sources like the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the quarterly census employment and wages information. And we used a lot of those industry sectors to derive a sense of how large and how impactful the creative sector is in the state of Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania alone, we see that the creative sector spans over 190,000 jobs, over 3,400 firms, both for-profit and nonprofit, and generate over $27.1 billion in economic activity every year. And that's just in the state of Pennsylvania. We know that's nationwide, it's much higher. We also wanted to take a look at, we wanted to understand how the pandemic has impacted the creative sector. And generally, we were able to come up with some figures that said that between 2019 and 2020, in the height of the pandemic, in Pennsylvania, the creative sector lost an estimated 16,000 of those 191,000 jobs. It also lost $4.4 billion in sales. And that was just a 1-year kind of snapshot of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also did a lot of work as we were writing this report to talk to professionals within the creative sector. We held several town hall meetings throughout the state, and we engaged over 200 creative sector professionals, arts workers, creative sector business owners, nonprofit leaders, as well as funders and policymakers and those that work to support the creative sector in their communities. And from those individuals, we also heard about some of the more tangible or on the ground impacts of the pandemic on day-to-day operations. So in addition to those high level macro impact numbers that I showed on the previous slide, we heard things like, a loss of revenue due to closures of venues in communities during the public health crisis, losing out on competition from other types of socially distant entertainment, whether that's outdoor recreation or sporting events. Organizations experienced a loss of membership due to different disruptions in their operations, but also generally at a macro scale, patrons having less disposable income because of the economic downturn that the pandemic caused, really affecting the amount of money that people have to spend on arts and cultural experiences, arts and culture products, and shopping at creative sector businesses. Organizations also experienced a huge level of uncertainty around planning, budgeting, and fundraising for the future. That's a challenge that's ongoing still. We heard a lot about the mental health impacts and strain on the creative workforce in general that were really overstretched. burdened and are still experiencing a high level of burnout. And we also heard about disproportionate impacts on marginalized creative workers, as well as on BIPOC-led organizations. And so those were some of the anecdotal pieces of information that we were able to gather to understand kind of where the creative sector is in this environment where we are right now. And so why does all of this matter? The creative sector in Pennsylvania and all over the country is such an integral part of our community fabric. So we know that cultural amenities generate tourism spending in regions. We see public art that helps to foster a shared community identity and a shared sense of pride. We know that creative entrepreneurship and events and the energy that's created through those activities are really integral in creating the vibrant places that drive talent attraction to our communities, as well as retention. And so, when we look at this as through an economic development lens, talent attraction and retention are some of the most critical components that we can put forward to making our communities strong and vibrant. And so we're, continue to be concerned about the state of the creative sector and are looking for ways to ensure that it's healthy going forward and contributes to vibrancy in the long term. And so what does this mean for the future? And one of the components that we looked at as a part of this process was understanding migration flows, and again, that talent attraction piece that's so critical to today's economies. We did a study about population loss and gain throughout the state of Pennsylvania, and we found that a majority of counties in our state, 43 out of 67, are experiencing population loss. And so that's a really stark reality, I think, especially as we think about some of our rural communities that are losing population at a more rapid rate. But really, it's an issue that everybody is thinking about in terms of its effects on state budgets and ability to attract and retain employers to our communities. And so we really see this emerging opportunity in terms of capturing migration and having the creative sector being a part of that puzzle, mitigating population loss in our communities, making sure our communities are cherished and well loved, but also capturing remote workers and others that are fleeing larger markets, maybe looking for a better quality of life, a lower cost of living, but a high quality experience nonetheless. And we see the strategy really playing out very successfully in a lot of our rural areas. I think a lot of times we think of arts and culture as sometimes a primarily urban experience, but we know that that's not the case. We took a look at a recent study from the National Governors Association. They did a really in-depth study about arts in rural communities, and they found a number of really interesting things. The first point to bring up is that rural counties that are the home to performing arts organizations have experienced population growth that is 3 times higher than rural counties that lack those same performing arts institutions. So apples to apples, rural communities that have arts institutions perform better from a population growth standpoint than those that don't have them. The second point that we thought was very interesting was around the rural arts organizations and their ability to bring in tourists from out of the area. So rural arts organizations create non-local tourism opportunities at higher rates than urban arts organizations. Said another way, rural arts organizations report a 31% of their audience that is traveling beyond a reasonable distance to attend events or venues, while the corresponding share of urban organizations that can report that is just 19%. So again, looking at arts and culture as a growth and tourism and vibrancy strategy really works well, especially in some of our rural communities. And so some of the key recommendations that came out of this reporting process have to do again with how we address the effects of the ongoing pandemic, as well as how to build the arts and culture into our community fabric more broadly, so that all sectors of our economy and our community are functioning at a high level. The first thing, probably not surprising to anybody on the webinar today, there's always a need for direct financial support to organizations to help support their ongoing operations, especially as we're looking at pent-up demand for in-person outdoor cultural experiences as we're emerging, in some part out of our pandemic quarantines. We're seeing a lot of support needed for things like staff rehiring and retraining to comply with advanced safety protocols. So investing in air filters and other safety measures to provide equipment that can help venues offer more outdoor events like tents and sound amplification, as well as infrastructure that can help organizations continue to provide high quality hybrid programming. We saw a lot of benefits, even though we're all constantly zoomed out still, a lot of benefits come in terms of access when you're able to offer things online. The second big recommendation that came out of this process was around more broadly establishing value and using the arts to do that. So one of the big findings and threads within the report that was produced was that the creative sector can be used as a way to really support mental health throughout our communities and also help rebuild the social fabric that was damaged through these periods of social isolation that we've experienced over the past year and a half. We also see that, STEAM programming, tying together education, entertainment, to really highlight for students the many career pathways that exist within the creative sector that is so diverse, not just on the performing or visual arts side, but everything from graphic designers to writers and editors, sound engineers, promoters, and PR people. This is a really diverse and broad category in terms of career development. And then finally, we've seen a lot of evidence of arts and culture education that can help students learn these really key, critical 21st century workforce skills that are applicable regardless of what industry folks go into, whether we're talking about engineering or law. Those self-awareness, interpersonal skills, teamwork, arts and culture can be a great way to instill and teach those skills in a classroom environment. One other trend is around enabling entrepreneurship. And so, we know that small businesses are really the lifeblood of our communities. And so one key recommendation is to introduce additional resources and tools that can help these entrepreneurs really excel in their marketplaces. This might include things like digital training for online marketing, which is a new skill for many businesses, things like web optimization, enabling e-commerce, and also delivering, again, virtual content that can be consumed anywhere in the world. These are all new concepts for a lot of creative business owners and areas where they can use support. This also might look like business workshops for things like branding, assessing financials, building efficient revenue streams. And we've seen this done really successfully throughout the state, as well as throughout the country through models like shared maker spaces or other shared service models that can help those entrepreneurs in a cohort environment. One area that we feel like is really important is around marketing of regional assets in terms of storytelling for your community and broadcasting out all of the things that makes your community special to existing residents, potential future residents, visitors, and businesses, and potential employees of those businesses that may be new to your community. So really incorporating the creative sector into that regional storytelling can be a really great way to get those messages out. We're starting to see, again, a lot of rural communities that are capturing a lot of the economic growth that is resulting from a lot of the shift that we're seeing to outdoor activities. So farm and wineries holding concerts, rural main streets becoming shopping and retail destinations. These are all trends that can be marketed and capitalized in your community. And then finally, just recognizing that exposure can be limited, especially from a media standpoint. So oftentimes this is most successful when there's a coordinated statewide or regional push on behalf of and in collaboration with local arts entities to really do that effective storytelling to get your community's message out there. The last area and the most important area is around the integration of the creative sector into broader economic development efforts. And so we really see a space for state and regional leaders to have a role in bringing creative sector participants into broader economic development efforts. This might include building really comprehensive strategies that include the creative sector. And this might look like Main Street planning, learning best practices from the past year and a half, local zoning changes that might be needed to reduce barriers to creating vibrancy, enabling pop-ups, enabling sidewalk dining and special events and that sort of thing in your community. Also including creative workers in areas that recovery might be focused through things like historic building redevelopment, broader placemaking. And then finally, one big push is around broadband, because the creative sector is more and more reliant on people's ability to access online services. The creative sector can both advocate for greater broadband, especially in our rural communities, but can also serve as an information source in helping populations gain access to that broadband infrastructure once it's in place. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on some of the opportunities that are coming down the pike as we speak. This is really sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity to put some of these practices into place, given the vast amount of economic recovery resources that are coming into our communities in the coming months. So, some of those include the American Rescue Plan Act. This can be used at the local level to develop things like parks, open spaces, and public squares, providing assistance to small businesses, including creative businesses, to help with reopening and improving the built environment through facade improvements or other improvements to enhance that vibrancy in our Main Street districts. The EDA's Build Back Better is a regional challenge. So this is at the regional level. It's really looking to help regions increase their economic resilience through growing new industry clusters or scaling existing ones. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And then finally, EDA's Travel, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation Program is at the state and community level to really help states invest in marketing, infrastructure, workforce development, and other types of activities to really enhance and reboot safe leisure, business, and international travel. So with that, I'm going to pause and turn it over to Patrick to talk a little bit more about his organization.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Even though I am the executive director of Erie Arts and Culture, I perceive it to be our community and our region's organization. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about our investments in creativity and culture and why we make those investments. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. So Erie Arts and Culture was actually founded as the first arts council in the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 1960. We serve 6 counties in northwestern Pennsylvania, and we make sure that we are able to improve the lives of our region's residents by equitable distributions of funding and resources that make sure that everyone in our community has meaningful opportunities to engage and participate with the creative and cultural sector, whether socially, economically, or educationally. Go ahead and advance the next slide. And in 2019, we went through a strategic planning process that really was designed to assist us in better defining who we are and what we do and why we do it. Like many arts organizations, or I should specifically say arts agencies, we had historically really focused our efforts on nonprofit cultural organizations. And really, I think that as a result of that, the community kind of just perceived us as a pass-through organization. There wasn't a lot of focus on what was our value add. How were we doing more than just re-administering grant dollars that were entrusted to us? So we defined 4 roles that we go after through our programs and services. The first is a capacity builder, and with those capacity building services, they're predominantly designed to assist those individuals and organizations that compose the creative and cultural sector. We're also an advocate and a funder of arts and lifelong learning, which means opportunities to participate and engage at any life stage, not just in the scholastic settings. We work to preserve and promote diverse cultures, which I'll touch base on in a later slide. And then lastly, we're a placemaker and a placekeeper through people and place-based development strategies. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. Oh, that was the wrong direction. Oh. And even though we're talking about economic impact today, I think it's really important that we take a moment to at least acknowledge the fact that the role and impact of the arts and the creative sector should never be boiled down to just its economic value. I think there's been a trend over the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years to communicate the impact of our sector predominantly through its economic activity and its economic impact. And yes, that is important. And yes, it's one of the areas that's a little bit easier to measure through quantitative data. But I also think it's really important for us to also focus on the intrinsic value of the arts, specifically by way of personal development, how individuals grow through their engagement and interaction and participation with the creative and cultural sectors, and then also community development, how our sector helps provide identity to our neighborhoods, to our downtown districts, and really establishes a sense of place. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. So I want to talk today about 3 things that Erie Arts and Culture has been doing over the last 3 years since we started our strategic planning process. That is new territory for us. For the most part, I'd say new territory for us. And the direction that we're heading as a community and as a region. And the first is our focus on the new American economy. So Erie, Pennsylvania, located in northwestern Pennsylvania, has been a resettlement city for refugees since the 1970s. As our industry and economy has changed over the years, we have seen a lot of disinvestment in our community, and as a result of that, population decline. Our community was built for a population of probably around 150,000, and at the worst of it, it was down to about 70,000. And there was just a really great study that came out recently from Penn State Barron here in Erie through their economics department that looked at the role that new Americans have played in helping stabilize our population decline, but also the role they play in growing new aspects of our economy. So it's estimated that within the city of Erie, about 20% of our population is represented by new Americans coming from 85 plus different countries of origin. I know that Kelly Armour is on the line today, and I really can't talk about this work without acknowledging Kelly Armour and the decades of great work that she's done in this area of building relationships with refugees and immigrants as they come into Erie to make sure that their cultural traditions and cultural art forms are preserved and promoted so that they're not lost over time. We definitely believe in integration, not assimilation, and we want to see those culture bearers be valued for the community assets that they are, and these art forms be preserved over time. So we've been investing a lot in not only new American artists, but also new American businesses. You will probably see in the bottom right corner, there's a young man named Matham, who is a photojournalist who came to Erie as a former refugee from Iraq. And Matham, 3 years ago, put together some really fantastic walking tours of new American-owned food markets. So there's, I think, 12 different census tracts in the city of Erie that are identified as food deserts. And yes, they're lacking the major grocers that some communities are used to. But within those neighborhoods, there are incredible, incredible food markets owned and operated by new Americans, whether coming from Bhutan and Nepal or Syria, Iraq. We have some really fantastic food markets. And those food markets are very affordable. When you walk within them, you can find produce, you can find nuts and seeds, dairy, meat, non-perishable goods, et cetera, et cetera. The challenge is that a lot of our community either are unaware of those markets or maybe are intimidated to enter into those markets if they're not a part of the culture that those markets represent. So Matham did a fantastic job of doing walking tours of those markets. And each walking tour had a full capacity to be about 15 people. And he did 15 different tours. And the feedback we got was incredible. People talking about how they were embarrassed by the fact that they were previously hesitant to either enter into that part of the city or actually step foot into the markets. Folks talked about the value they received by engaging with the shop owners and learning about their culture and learning about their experiences as former refugees. And it was just a really, really fantastic initiative. Last year, through a grant that Kelly obtained from the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Arts, we continued to work with new American artists, and we worked with 3 different artists to create public art outside of these very same food markets. How do we raise the visual profile of these markets? And we thought that public art was a really great way to do that. So the Lake Erie International Market, we paired them with a Sudanese henna artist who had never done any public art before. We had some really great art educators in our community who worked with her to build her capacity and skill set so that she could create the murals on the outside of the market. The UK supermarket, which is Bhutanese, we had a artist originally from Iraq work with them, and he did a multi-panel mural outside of their windows. And then we also had the Al Medina market, and we had an Iraqi graphic designer work with them to do some window displays as well. And again, started to elevate the profile. This initiative was covered by our local paper, continued to raise the topic and conversation of food access within food deserts and the value that our new Americans are bringing into our communities. And it was really fantastic. I should say too that Matham's initiative was funded by the Erie Community Foundation, and we're certainly thankful for that support. Kelly had also taken that grant from the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Arts and worked with other new American artists like Ansamana, who's a tailor up in the left-hand corner. He did some workshops with art educators and classrooms. He also did workshops with some of our corporate citizens like Erie Insurance, where he talked about his art form, his traditions, and also his experiences as a former refugee. And then we also worked with our events programmers. So Erie in the summertime has a ton of events. I mean, probably 4 or 5 events every week, and they're all free. They bring a critical mass of people into our city. And even though we have an incredibly diverse population in our city, historically, a lot of our events have been geared towards the dominant culture. And you haven't seen that diversity reflected in our events programming. And again, I can't say enough about Kelly's efforts. She did a fantastic job of pairing our events programmers with some of our diverse musicians that exist within our community. And it was just a really, really fantastic job. If you can go ahead and advance to the next slide, I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to try to get through this. We recognize that Erie has always been a community that has made things. So as we move forward, one of our really central focuses is arts and industry. How are we pairing artists, whether they're artists from within our region or outside of our region, with our industrial capabilities that exist here? So we know we have heavy and precision manufacturers that are working with a wide range of materials from wood, steel, glass, plastic, stone, etc. And then we also have a lot of technology innovators within our region. So we identify, as it relates to opportunities to advance our creative ecosystem and economy, pairing our artists with our industrial capabilities. And I'm going to ask you to progress to our last slide real quick. And lastly, opportunities for growth. And this is really about taking advantage of public-private partnerships as well as tax incentives that exist within the Commonwealth. So in the Commonwealth, in the creative industries, there's 3 different tax incentives. One is for film and television production, another is for video game production, and then the third is for live event production. I really want to highlight Rock Lidditz out of Lidditz, Pennsylvania. I think they're one of the best examples in our state of an initiative that is relatively new. I think they started in 2015, that has just created a tremendous, tremendous economic impact in their community by way of public-private partnerships and going after the creative economy and utilizing those tax incentives. But here in Erie, we think that there's an opportunity to go after multimedia and animation because it's an overlap between those 2 industries of film and video games. We have a video game production company headquartered here. We have a lot of film activity here. They're currently doing a strategic plan and logistics plan to see about productions $1 million or less in our region. We also have 5 different universities in our community, one of whom is Edinburgh University, and they have a great film and animation department. Dave Filoni, who is the head of Lucas Animation, is an alum of Edinburgh University. So as we think about future opportunities for growth, I think that sweet spot for our creative economy in this region is multimedia and animation. I apologize if I ran over. I'd now like to pass it over to Kate so she can talk about the good work that they're doing.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, everyone. I'm so excited to be here to talk about the work going on in Kane, Pennsylvania. My job really encompasses supporting our revitalization efforts through commerce, through industry development, and really it's just connecting with the whole community. And before I get into this specific project, I'd like to talk about this group of people that are involved in economic and community development in our town. We kind of just call ourselves the Sparks group. It's very informal, and it is people from, like I said, the economic and community development roles throughout our community that gather monthly to talk about what's going on. And one of the projects that came out of that group was a town branding project. So during COVID, we actually worked with the consultant to come up with a town brand to market our community. And we had over 800 people respond in surveys to give their input, which was a large amount for a town that's around 3,500 people. And then it was released via Zoom on a Facebook Live in December of 2020, which was a really tough time in the COVID, with the COVID impact at that moment. And it was a way that we were really able to bring our community together. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that Sparks group, which has done some great work and led some great initiatives, and the branding process that used that creativity and engaged the entire community to bring some healing and some enthusiasm around our town during a tough and dark time. This project in particular, we partnered with the Pennsylvania Wilds, and the PA Wilds are a great regional partner that helped us be allowed to promote who we are and what we're doing and the entrepreneurship in a creative way by utilizing our vacant windows. As you can see, we have a few vacant buildings left uptown still. And we worked with the local photographer and a local graphic designer to come up with these window wrap projects. And it was really just one of the examples of how the partnership with the PA Wilds works. We also are working with them on a grant to help increase information around the technology available for people who are currently living here, as well as trying to get people who want to move here and work remotely be able to access those technologies, and how can we make it a welcoming place? So that's a partnership that's continuing to go on through this bigger project that we're starting through the next grant round. We've also, as a rural community, sometimes I think that we get overlooked with funding at times, or we also have our stories told for us. And so storytelling has been a great creative way we've been able to tell our own stories and get out who we are. And so we've done a few different projects that I want to touch on before I get into the venue here. Just quickly, prior to COVID, we did this project called 100 Days of Kane, where we interviewed 100 residents 100 days in a row through Facebook Live. And we put them on a blog, and it was a great way for our stories to be told in our own words. But then through COVID, it was a great tool, and we've seen it even continuing today for people who are looking to move here. If they want to get a feel for who our community is, they can go and listen to the different stories. Or we even had a church that was looking for a pastor who highlighted their members that were storytellers in that series and let them know these are some of the members that you might get to know. So it's been a creative way we've been able to use storytelling that has had a longer term impact for economic development here in Kane. And this here is an example of how we've been able to utilize some of our outdoor spaces. So this was an abandoned lot uptown that our revitalization organization turned into an amphitheater. And pre-COVID, it was used quite a lot for concerts and such, but it really became apparent what an asset it is during the COVID time, because it is this great outdoor space. This, along with the drive-in theater, was a place where even when we had to have social distancing outside, we were able to have concerts and dance studio shows and performances. It's open to the community to sign up and use for any creative endeavor that they would like. So it's a way to engage the community to come together and be creative. And finally, I just want to touch on the West Penn Power Sustainable Energy Fund, who is a great partner as well. And they are creating one of the first retrofit commercial passive houses in the nation right here in Uptown Kane. And they're not doing it from scratch. They're taking an 1800s building and trying to basically make it airtight. So it has been quite a project. They're in the middle of it, but they've allowed us to use a lot of creativity to help tell those stories too. You know, we're working with a children's museum to do some art installations that will go in there so that we can really help people understand what the passive house is, as well as partnering with our school district for that children's museum project to help them have a hand in creating the content. And so there's just a lot of great things going on, and these are just a few of the many things. And I know that I'm not alone here in Kane to say that rural communities are doing really great things. And one of the best parts of being rural is we really do need to cooperate and rely on one another in a more regional aspect. And so we have so many great partnerships, and those relationships, I think, are what allow us to continue to rise together. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions if you guys want to contact me or share ideas. And just thanks again for this opportunity to talk today.
Great. We'll follow up with Pam, who's going to speak on her efforts at the PA CDC.
Thank you, Nicole. I hope everybody can hear me. And thank you, Kate, and thank you, Patrick, for your wonderful presentations. It's so delightful to learn more about your communities and the work that you're trying to accomplish. I know we have very little time left, so I'll go very, very quickly. I just want to say one of the things that was very apparent listening to my colleagues, Patrick and Kate, as well as Nicole's presentation, is that if there's anything that I want to articulate to you moving forward about our work in Philadelphia, is that all of our work is predicated, our members' work is predicated on partnerships and building relationships and sustaining those relationships to heal communities. The members that we work with and engage with, organizations like CMAC and Nicetown CDC and ASE CDC, are all engaged in a range of programming specifically to address their issues as they relate to their neighborhood development, but specifically as it relates to recovery and resiliency, they are part and parcel about healing and providing spaces of healing across all different aspects, whether it is about finding resources so that people can stay in their homes, providing resources of food so they can be healthy and remain in their communities, whether it is allowing people to connect with each other after facing very serious trauma and violence. Our member organizations are doing that work at an extraordinary level. And the thing I want to be able to articulate, and you can, go through those slides very, very quickly because we don't have time to do a deep dive with any of them, is to very much think about how you can support networks that are already established doing incredible work at the neighborhood level. One of the things that I think that was a through line throughout the report, as well as in the presentations prior, is that all of this is predicated on how we connect with one another and individuals that are at the forefront doing extraordinary, extraordinary things. And the more opportunities we have to share with people that and invest in those networks, the better we will be as a community, I think, in terms of dealing with resiliency. Because COVID is one set of actions, right? It's a tremendously powerful, sad experience, but we will have others. And how will we overcome those moving forward? And all that, we will never be able to overcome them unless we continue to build those networks of support. And I would encourage people to partner with their local CDC associations, their local CDCs, their artists and artist activists that are working at the community level to continue that support, because it's with those partnerships, those collaborations that you will see lasting resiliency so that people can overcome, whether it be a weather disaster, a social violence issue, or another pandemic. And I think I'm pretty much out of time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pam, for sharing this. I'm just going to scroll through the last of these photos because I think they provide a really nice snapshot of what's going on in the Philadelphia area and some of those great partnerships that you highlighted.
Nicole, I'm sorry, just to quickly, I wanted to just quickly highlight the fact that last slide featured a local entrepreneur. Her name is Janine Cook. She owns Harriet's Bookshop in Kensington, this Kensington section of Philadelphia. That picture is from a sisterhood sit-in that was established when a mob of white vigilantes were threatening her bookshop. So friends of hers got together and rallied together to establish this sense of protection and a sense of community with the existing community, to say that people will not be pushed out based on the color of their skin and the work that they do. And again, that is all predicated again on individuals linking with other individuals to address a significant problem. And if you think about the depth and breadth of all of our work, it boils down to that. Places matter, businesses matter, but people matter most. And that's the thing we want to try to, I think, that is essential in this work.
Wonderful and very powerful story. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. We have less than 5 minutes left. We had planned to have a much longer Q&A portion. We know that you all have been submitting your questions through the chat and the Q&A boxes. We also got quite a few questions as you all were registering for this webinar. So just again, wanted to thank you all for your interest in this topic. We know it's a very dynamic topic. We probably should have planned for more than an hour to have a robust conversation, but that's a lessons learned for next time. As our last, maybe as we wrap up in our last 5 minutes, I would like to ask each of the panelists and our speakers to maybe touch on, if you feel so inclined, I think a big topic here was partnerships. And so, if you could touch on, how have you found it most successful, most impactful to collaborate with partners in your community for accomplishing some of these goals around economic vibrancy? How do you collaborate with local businesses in ways that are mutually beneficial? How do you make connections with local government entities in a way that you feel like is fruitful and productive? So I'm just going to turn it over. I know a lot of you probably have opinions on how to form partnerships.
I do. I touched on it at the beginning of my talk, the Sparks group. So we have members of our borough council, we have our mayor, the surrounding township supervisor, representatives from the Chamber of Commerce, our industry development corporation, and our revitalization organization, as well as some people that have been involved in community development for decades. And one of the things that I think is so strong about that is we talk about the different grants that we're applying for, and we say, you know what, that one would be good for you. I'm going to apply for this one, and I think this organization should apply for that one. So we have that coordination and communication as we go forward applying for grants. But really the power of it is each of these people are connected to boards of directors. And so once a year we get together as our representatives that meet monthly and the entire boards of directors. And each organization leaves that time with one project that can be completed within a year. So whether it's getting bike racks purchased and installed, the town brand was one for the Chamber of Commerce. There's just a way to see visible change in small increments. So it keeps that momentum going, and it includes entire boards of directors throughout our community. So that is one way our partnerships locally have really been strengthened, is through the Sparks model.
We have a couple minutes left. Anybody else like to comment on that?
I would like to add that I think one of the other things that is really essential in partnerships is that you have to be willing also to get out of your own way, right? And sometimes check your own agenda, listen to the others at the table. And that does require a bit of courage, right? Because we all have our assignments, we all have our deliverables that we have to, act on throughout the year. But partnership is like any kind of real relationship, right? You put in some, I put in some. I might not get my opportunity this time, but I'm going to help you get your opportunity now. And so to the extent that you can cultivate those relationships again, this is all about people, right? What makes Kate's project work is that there are people at the table. Some of them might be a little obnoxious, some of them might be a little funny, but they genuinely want to be there. And the same is true with any partnership, right? You have to kind of maneuver past the craziness to get to the thing that makes the best sense for everybody. And I think that not being afraid to just say, hey, can I come talk to you? Or can I just think about the partnership that we've established, CDC has established with PCA. Sarah Merritt on Karl's staff contacted us and said, hey, can we come talk to you? And from that, established this amazing range of collaborations and kind of brainstorming and partnerships. And that was just from a phone call, cold call that built over time. And I would suggest and encourage folks not to be afraid to pick up a phone and call. And, you might not get through, you might get, brushed back, you might get ignored, but keep making those calls because you will get through eventually.
Wonderful. I think that's a great note to stop on. Again, we are out of time. I apologize. And thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us. I just want to thank again, Joy, Karl, and Jamie for supporting and fostering this report and this conversation. And Patrick, Kate, and Pam, thank you so much for sharing your on the ground work. It's been really impactful hearing about your experience and your work. Claire just put a link into the chat to tell you about our upcoming webinar on regional collaboration and resilience and recovery funding. So please, if you're inclined, consider attending that webinar as well. It should contain some good info as well. So with that, thanks everybody again for your time. We really appreciated and had a wonderful time this afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you.